So the first thing you do when you're working with an After Effects template is you unhide all the layers that have the little shy icon here by coming up to the top of the timeline and clicking on this little icon, and it'll reveal any hidden layers. Then the next thing we did in class was that we went in here and we trimmed all the layers just so we can visually see on our timeline where each layer starts. And then it's a matter of just studying every layer. And if you need to, turn off the eye icon so that way you can see what is happening, what happens with every layer as it's selected. And if nothing is happening, of course, you know that it's coming in, excuse me, at a later time. All right, so we are going to recreate this. I'm just going to start over here. I'm going to create a new composition. I'm going to make it 22 seconds long, and we'll call this template. All right, so the first thing I want to create is probably come down here to the very bottom and start with this layer. This is our background layer. If I click on it, it's just a brown solid layer, but it has a gradient ramp effect that changes the color to a more cyan blue here. So let's do that. Layer, new, solid. I already have a brown selected, so I will just hit OK. And once it's in my timeline, I'll come over to my effects control panel. Make sure I'm in the default editing mode. And I'll type in ramp. I'm looking for gradient ramp, so you can double click it here and it'll automatically apply the layer that's selected. All right, so we're going to click on this black swatch and we're going to change the color to a cyan blue, something like that. We'll make the end color a darker cyan blue, but a little bit more pale, something like that is good. Another thing that's changed is on the background layer, it's a radial ramp, not a linear ramp. So when we come over here to the gradient ramp, we can select a radial ramp instead of a linear. If you look over here, the linear ramp just starts at the top and goes to the bottom in a very linear fashion. If we choose radial, now we have more of a center point, and then everything from the center point gets darker. So we can actually adjust where the center point is. I'm going to click on the start of the ramp and move my y-axis down to about the center. And then the end ramp, I'm going to move my y-axis to make that look a little bit bigger and spread out. So something like that. Next thing is we'll bring in our background image, which is in footage, and it says element ping file. So I will just drop it into my timeline, put it above our background. We can actually rename this. We'll click on it and hit the return key, and we'll just call it background. Here is our image. Now, if I go back to the original composition and kind of found out that these two elements are really our main background images, and then these two are just added for kind of background decoration. So here is, if I take off that, you'll see that that's the background image, right? And up here is more of the main composition or main background. I'm going to lower my magnification ratio to like 12, and you can see every time I click on an element, it'll be outlined over here. So I'm going to take off these two for now. I'm going to go a little bit smaller here. Okay, So here's what I want to do. I want to duplicate my elements layer, and I want to position it in this fashion. So one of them is completely covering the frame, and the other one is kind of staggered to the right, and we have some overlap, and a little bit at the bottom is showing. So let's recreate that on our template. Go to about 6.25, and so this is about right here. And we'll drag in another instance of this on top. And we'll reposition that one. To about right there. Looks good. Now let's rename them. Let's name this one Element 1 because this is our kind of where we're starting point. So select the layer, hit the return key. Same thing for the next one. Let's make both of these 3D. The other thing that's happening is on the elements, it also has a gradient ramp. The gradient ramp starts with a cyan blue color, and the end color is white, and this is a linear ramp. So let's do that. We can actually select both of these at a time and then double click the ramp effect since it's already called up. And with both of them still selected, I can come up here and do both of them at one time. All right, so that brings out the color in the images. Okay, so let's add our camera. We are going to be using a camera with a 28mm lens, and we're going to use a 2-node camera. And let's look at that movement. So we're doing just a slow zoom in. If I click on the camera layer, I can see that it takes about a second, starting at 0, and we zoom in. I'm going to turn off this fade layer for now. We'll do this one at the very end, just fading up from it. The other thing I want to do is change this to a 2-view horizontal so that I can also look at my camera from a top angle view. If I put my mouse and I select the layer that says camera, I can then see the wireframe. And here is the movement that's happening. So let me just adjust this so we can see it better. So the camera starts zoomed out and it zooms in. Actually, it's a tracking movement, so it dollies in to the scene. It holds there for a couple of seconds, and then the camera moves to the right. But at the same time that it moves to the right, we also have a Z rotation. It's rotating for 45 degrees. So 0 to 45 degrees as it tracks to the right now. And then we have just a hold on that for a couple of seconds, and then we have another movement. Camera continues to track to the right with another Z rotation. This time it's like a -8 rotation. And it kind of just does that throughout the whole scene. Keeps moving, tracking either left or right, and coming back and rotating the camera. Holding, and then moving with the rotation. Okay, going back to our template. Let's add the zoom in on our camera. So I'm just going to open up our transform so we can see what we're doing. We are actually going to use the unified camera tool up here. So I'm just going to press the letter C so I can get my camera. There we go. We'll start with that. We're going to add a keyframe on position and point of interest. Remember, we're working with a 2-node camera, so we have the point of interest that we can adjust as well. So we'll start here, and then we'll zoom in for 1 second. So I'm going to move my playhead to 1 second, and here I'm going to hit the letter C a couple of times so I get my zoom in tool, and then from here I'm just going to zoom in a bit, and I'll reposition it. I'll hit the letter C on my keyboard to get my X and Y movement. And I'm going to just move that slightly up and maybe to the right. So we want that shape to be kind of off to the left a little bit, but I don't want it too far down in my frame. So again, just using the unified camera, hitting the letter C to toggle between every one of those tools. The rotation, X and Y axis, and the Z axis. This is a tool that's going to go away, and they're going to come out with a better tool, hopefully in the next iteration of After Effects. All right, so I'm just going to play that back. Let it render. Yep, that looks good. So the other thing is, remember, we want to add some Easy Ease keyframes. So I'm going to select those 2 keyframes, just the ending. I'm going to right click on it and go to Keyframe Assistant and select Easy Ease. Perfect. We don't really need to do the first couple of keyframes here because we're going to fade in to this composition. So we won't even see this until 4 or 5 frames in. So not a big deal. Okay, so coming back to our original composition, we have the zoom in. And as we're zooming in, you'll see another shape appear inside that hexagram. And let's see if we can find it here. I wish they would have labeled this better. Yeah, it's shape layer 2 on here. I'm going to zoom in on it. And let me zoom in a little bit on my magnification ratio. Center this up. So as the camera is zooming in, we have the shape layer scaling up. All right, so let's do that. Going into our template composition, I'm going to deselect all my layers. So I'm just going to click over here. I'm going to come up to the shape tool and select the polygon tool. Let me scale this up a little bit more so I can see. And here we're going to kind of recreate this. We're going to do some adjustments. So we'll just roughly draw it in. Here, let's rename it. So select the layer, hit return. Let's rename this. Let's call this Polygram 1. Let's also make it 3D. I'm going to move it below our camera. Then we can change the color. While it's still selected, come up to Fill, and let's get like a nice blue color, something that complements, yeah, maybe that. And then we're going to adjust it so that it's not a 5-pointed polygram, but it's a 6-pointed polygram. Do that inside Contents, Polystar 1, and under Polystar Path 1. Changing the number of points from 5 to 6. Then it's a matter of using your selection tool, bringing that down, resizing it to kind of fit in there. We also need to rotate it Here's my rotate tool. That looks pretty good. So the other thing we want to remember is that we want to adjust this anchor point, because when we start scaling it up, it's going to scale up from this anchor point. So with the polygram layer selected, come up to the pan behind and double click on it. Double click holding the command key, and it'll center it right in the middle. So now we're ready to do our keyframing. Going to close this out just under the content section and come to the transform property, still under the polygram 1 layer. Open that up, and I know I want to end right here, and I know this is my end point. So I'm going to start my first keyframe on the end animation. So I'm going to click my keyframe there. That's my end point. I'm going to move my playhead in a few frames, maybe about to 13 on my timeline. And I'm going to move that scale to 0. So I'm just going to type that in. And now let me play it back, see what we've got. Let it render. Yep, exactly what we're looking for. Zooming in, and while it's zooming in, we're scaling up our little polygram inside that polygram. Polygram within a polygram. All right, let's go back to our original. And the next thing is we have this kind of rectangle shape over to the right of it, and it animates in using a card wipe. So let's find that on here. It is called text holder 1, and you'll see if when I twirl open on the effects, it has a card wipe. So let's do that. Go into template. We're going to use the pen tool, but before we do that, we want to make sure that we're not selecting anything else, because if we leave this selected, it'll add a mask to it, and we don't want that. So I'm going to deselect that, then come up to my pen tool, and I'm just going to draw roughly a rectangle, something like that. Maybe this is a little closer to the white, and yeah, something more or less this way. We're also going to make this a 3D layer, and we're going to rename it, and we'll reposition it in a bit. Select your layer, hit return, and let's label this rectangle 1. I'm going to move this underneath my camera. I like to have everything underneath the camera, anything that's applying 3D movement underneath the camera. Okay, let's move this using the selection tool, and let's position it back into place about right there. It looks a little bigger now because it's in 3D, so I'm just going to scale it down a little. All right, something like that. Okay, so that, let's add our card wipe. So we'll come into the effects, type in card. There it is. So I'm going to drag this onto my rectangle 1 layer. Perfect. And when we're working with the transition, I like to come in here and just mess with the transition complete, kind of see what's going on here, how I will need to animate this. One thing that's changed here on the back layer, we don't want the back layer to be itself. Right now it's mapped to rectangle 1. We're going to change that to none. And that'll ensure that we can start our transition at 100% And when we do that, it's completely off. It's not using any kind of back layer. All right, so let's see where we're going to start the animation. So we zoom in and the polygon gets animated on. I think right when the polygon is finished animating, we should start our card wipe. So I'm going to trim my rectangle layer, Option and open bracket. That way I know it's starting right there. I'm going to twirl that open, and we're going to be animating card wipe. We're going to start at 100%, and let's go to about, I don't know, 12 frames or so. So we're at 110, maybe 126. That's good enough. We'll change that to 0 now. It's kind of fast. Let's see how long they're doing theirs. Yeah, it animates pretty fast. That's fine. We can increase the number of card wipes and make this a little smaller, but I think it's good for now. It has some kind of transition, so it'll look nice. Going to twirl that close. We're done with rectangle 1. Now we want to add this little shadow underneath rectangle 1. Here is, they call it text holder, we're calling it rectangle 1. This is the shadow. So if I actually let me open that. And on the effects, they're using a card wipe and then a fast blur. So what we can do on our comp is we can just duplicate this. So I'm going to do Command D while that layer is selected. And I have a copy, and it has a card wipe effect already. The only thing I want to do is reposition it and give it a gray color. So select the one on the bottom. That'll be our shadow. Let's hit return, and let's title that rectangle. Actually, we're still rectangle 1. We'll make this the shadow one, and I'll change this one to rectangle 1. Okay, select rectangle 1 shadow, come up to the fill color and select a gray, and then we're going to reposition it using our selection tool. I'm just going to drag it down a bit. I'm going to move my playhead so I can see what I'm doing. Something like that. It has a little bit of rotation on it. Let's rotate it by 9 degrees. So let's come in here and under transform 9, something like that. Still doesn't look good. What we need is we need a little blur effect because the shadows shouldn't look so harsh. It should be kind of diffused. So we'll come in here and we'll add a blur. Let's use, I don't think the fast blur is on here anymore. It's a legacy. Whenever you see the word legacy in there, that means that it was on an older version of After Effects and it's no longer offered. But that means they replaced it with something better. So I think a good replacement for us to use is the fast box blur. Just going to drag it down. And then here we can increase the blur radius and maybe iterations to about 5. Yeah, that looks kind of nice. Maybe a little too blurry. Maybe go down to a 6 on that. That looks okay. Looks a little brown for me, but let me just see if I can color it a little darker. Okay, that looks better. All right, very good. So I'll close that layer. So we're done with that. Coming back to our original one, the next thing that they're doing is they're adding some text. Text 1 here. This is right here. There is an animator. I can't really tell what the animator is. It looks like it just, maybe a typewriter. It looks like a typewriter is writing that on there. So let's go to template and let's use our text tool. Type in here, text 1. We'll make that a 3D layer and bring it down underneath the camera. And then we can reposition it here. We can rotate it a little bit. Make sure we're not rotating X, Y, or Z. I think we just want to rotate it when the icon turns to that little circle, because otherwise we'll affect something else. Probably better just to come into the text layer and into transform and rotate the Z property. Something about right there. So here's where you can select what kind of font you want to use, how big you want this text to be, and what color you want the text, all of that. For now, I'll just leave it at about 56 Arial black, all caps. Looks good for me. All right, we are done with the text. The other thing is I'm going to trim my text layer. So let's see where we want it to come in. We want, as soon as the card wipe animates in, I think our layer of text should appear there. So I'm going to trim that. And we're also, don't want to forget our effect. We're using a typewriter. And usually when these typewriter effects or any preset animation is applied, it's usually too slow for me. So I'm just opening up all of these layers and I'm going to move this keyframe a little closer. And we'll just play it. Rendering time. It takes a long time to render. We're doing a lot of complicated animations right now, so that looks good. Let's play it back. Yeah, very good. Okay, I'm going to close that layer. We're done here. I'm going to hit a Command S. So going back to our original composition, now let's see what's happening here. Text comes on, and we have our camera movement right after that. So it kind of holds on that for a couple of seconds, and then we rotate. Again, let's select the camera layer and look over here to see what the movement is. It's moving to the right, and then it rotates at the same time. I'll open this up. So our keyframe started about 3 seconds. And if we look at this, here is where we're at, and we're just going to make the movement coming to this hexagon up here. So it's not a very big movement. It looks very smooth right here. So we're going to try to do that same thing on our template. All right, so let's open up our camera layer. So let's see where we want to start. I think we said about 3 seconds. Double check. Yeah, about 3:08. Close enough there. Okay, so here I'm just going to copy my last 2 keyframes. I'm going to select them and hit Command C for copy. and then I want to paste them here. So I'm going to do Command V as in Victor. And then I'm going to add a keyframe for the Z rotation. Basically what I'm doing is I'm telling After Effects to keep everything from here to here the same, and then from here to here the same. But my next keyframe at 4 seconds is where the movement is going to occur. So I'm going to switch back to my 2-view horizontal. And here, this is kind of the tricky part. This is where you want to play with your camera. So we know we're going to move over to the right, and then we're going to do a 45-degree rotation. So I'm going to use my Unified Camera tool. We're only using Unified Camera tool when we're on the camera layer. I know it's kind of tempting to do the Unified Camera tool when these layers are 3D, but really what you're affecting is the camera layer and not necessarily moving any of these. These are all kind of staying the same. We're just moving the camera. Okay, so let's go to our X and Y tool, and we're going to move over to the right. So, gotta practice this a little. And I think we're also coming down a bit. I'm gonna try that, and then I'm gonna move my Z rotation. I'm just gonna type in here 45 degrees. I'm not quite there yet. So I'm just going to go back and see. I see. I think we need to zoom out a bit and get this off of the screen. All right, so I'm going to use my keyframe over here so that I'm exactly where I need to be on my timeline. So I think I'm going to go back to my Unified Camera tool and use the zoom key, maybe zoom in, and then move it down a bit. Let's take a look. Yeah, maybe I'm zoomed in a little too much. Okay, well, I'm going to play that back, let it render and play it back. But I think here, it's just a matter of kind of going back and forth and playing with it to make sure that you got the movement the way you want it. So yeah, I think that looked good. Let me play it in real time. So it looks a little shaky. I think it's because this, from point A to point B, it's on a little bit of a diagonal. And if I go back to my original, it's a very straight line. So I'm going to try to make that a little bit more straighter. I'm going to use my back arrow to get into that keyframe. And okay, I see. So it's my zoom axis. I'm zooming in too much. So here's my zoom property. I'm going to zoom back out, and I'm just kind of looking over here. I want to make this a straight line. Maybe that's it. Let me play that back. I think I'm running out of memory here. It's working really slow. A little bit better. Just going to zoom in here and see. Yeah, maybe it's not. Let me go back to my previous keyframe. I'm at 1141, negative 1141. So I just type negative 1141. I'm ensuring that my z-axis is the same. Let me try that. Yeah, it's a much better look, or it's a much better movement. And what we can do is we can add an easy ease to these two keyframes. That'll also help it. I'm running out of memory here. But yeah, I think we've got it. So this is how far we got on Tuesday. So we'll pick it up here on Thursday. All right, see you then.